This video is sponsored by Crunchyroll. What's up, Wisecrack? Jared again. Today we're covering the only show guaranteed to traumatize you in its first 10 minutes, Goblin Slayer. Now, while much of the conversation surrounding this show focuses on that notorious scene that we're all aware of, there's something else going on that is a really interesting development for the fantasy genre. And it all revolves around the question, why does Goblin Slayer only kill goblins? And how does that form the show's greater message? Well, let's bathe in goblin blood and go deep in this Wisecrack Edition on Goblin Slayer. And as always, spoilers ahead. Let's kick it off with a quick recap. A bright-eyed priestess, no one has real names in this show, and friends set out on their first adventure, eager to kill goblins. But things go wrong. Very, very wrong. Her friends die, but Goblin Slayer rescues her in the nick of time. She joins his party and becomes his goblin-slaying Padawan. Their party grows when an elf, dwarf, and lizard man join them to investigate some particularly worrisome goblins on the elven border. Then they head off to kill even more sewer goblins. All the while, a demon lord is threatening the realm, and our hero seriously does not care.
都の方でデーモンが増えているのは知ってると思うけど、
知らん。
その原因は魔人王の復活なの。奴は軍勢を率いて世界を滅ぼそうとしているわ。
そうか。
私たちはそれであなたに協力を。
他は渡れ。ゴブリン以外に用はない。
Why? Well, sure, there's actual narrative reasons they killed his sister.
他にも例えば、自分の姉が襲われ、なぶり者にされ、玩具にされ、殺されたとする。
But because we like to get meta, we wanted to address this question as it pertains to the genre that the show is playing with, fantasy. Okay, yeah, it's anime, but the show is pretty heavy on references to D&D. There's the dice rolling, spell slots, guilds, quests, and a hodgepodge of other fantasy tropes. The show relishes in the generics of the fantasy genre. Characters and places have intentionally generic names, as the show prefers labels like Elven Ranger, Watertown, or Sword Maiden. Even big bosses get nomenclatures like Goblin Champion or Demon Lord. So let's talk about generic fantasy. In novels, tabletop games, or MMOs, heroes start with the small stuff. Rats, bugs, goblins. They grind through these small challenges until they're ready to take on stronger and more interesting enemies. But then, some horrifying villain emerges and threatens the world as you know it. The story starts with small problems and builds to a big one. And once that big one is slain, then things can go back to being peachy. Goblin Slayer steps off that linear path with a resounding, you know what, I'd rather just kill goblins, thanks. He rationalizes his choice when his compatriots try to get him to care about more pressing matters.
世界の命運がかかっているって理解している？
理解はできる。だが世界が滅びる前に、ゴブリンは村を滅ぼす。世界の危機はゴブリンを見逃す理由にならん。
See, even if the Demon Lord dies, the Goblin Slayer argues, goblins will still terrorize rural and vulnerable areas. By having our protagonist focus on the little guys of sorts, Goblin Slayer subverts the basic assumptions of the fantasy genre, namely the happily ever after. Do things go back to normal when we've murdered the big bad guy? Has the hero achieved peace? Not quite. A litany of less spectacular monsters still plague the villagers. In the most recent episode, the Demon Lord's death confirms this. While the constant reference to the Demon Lord earlier in the season would normally foreshadow some kind of climactic end-of-season showdown, the opposite happens. The Demon Lord is dispatched in under a minute by some random heroes that we neither know nor care about. And instead of suggesting some happily ever after, we're instead reminded of these words from the Sword Maiden.
世界はきっと救われるのでしょう。でも、高2に襲われた15歳の少女が今も救いを求めていたとしても、そんなことを気にかけてくれる人はどこにもいない。
We can better understand Goblin Slayer's logic with something called peace theory, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It asks, what exactly is peace? One theorist, John Galtung, draws a distinction between two kinds of peace, positive and negative. Negative peace is the absence of war. It's the kind of peace you're used to talking about. The end of World War II, or the Vietnam War, or the Civil War. You get it. In the fantasy genre, we can think of it as the absence of Night Kings, or Sauron, or Ganondorf, i.e. a world without the Demon Lords destroying the world as we know it. That's fine and dandy for peace theorists, but it doesn't examine the smaller and often more pervasive violence that affects society's most vulnerable people.
村に高2が出たんよ。このままじゃベゴもやられて畑も焼かれてまうよ。
That's where positive peace comes in. Positive peace is the presence of justice and protections that serve the needs of everyone. More or less what Goblin Slayer is after. While in the show it's simply goblins, in the real world it can be a litany of shitness. Poverty, famine, disease, corruption, discrimination, crime, and so on. The goblins of the real world, if you will. Positive peace is especially important for our understanding of violence. For many folks, violence is an interruption to daily life, but for some, it's the backdrop against which life takes place. Goblin Slayer can't just chill at an idyllic farm with Cowgirl, which is really what they call her, without searching for signs of goblins and fortifying defenses, unlike the Platinum heroes that killed the Demon Lord.
これが終わったら村に戻って3人でお祭りに行くんだ。
In Goblin Slayer's view, the shape of the world guarantees that people out on farms will always face goblin attacks. That's why Goblin Slayer doesn't care about the Demon Lord. He's busy burning down goblin nests. Now, that may not seem very peaceful, and it's not, but it's a question of conflict prevention and development. So simply by taking care of the goblin problem in the short term, Goblin Slayer starts the process of long-term protection. But it's not just that smaller issues can compound to create an equally crappy reality for many. The kind of small work that needs to be done is balked at. It's grunt work. Everyone wants the glory of killing the Demon Lord, but chopping goblins? That's child's play. Even when the Demon Lord is gone, the cleanup of his armies is below some people.
魔人王の残党がまだまだ残ってる。廃山の兵だ。軽くひねれていい稼ぎになる。
お前は行かないのか？
俺？冗談っぽいだぜ。そんな弱い者いじめみたいなことができっか。
Despite being a silver class adventurer, Goblin Slayer is mocked for his choice of missions.
ゴブリン大使のみ仕事で請け負う変わり者だろ。
In the hierarchy of adventuring, he's like if General Patton started cleaning latrines. But in the world of Goblin Slayer, toilets are going uncleaned because nobody wants to be the janitor. And without clean toilets, we might just all die from cholera, so somebody has to do that work. We can see this sort of thing all over the place in real life. People take jobs that get all the glory, so doctors researching cancer get all the press, while doctors doing routine work to test the water to prevent equally deadly stomach illnesses, well, not so much. People take jobs that are high paying and high prestige without much thought for what has the highest social impact. Even in sports, everyone wants to be the quarterback, nobody wants to be whatever a left tackle is. Goblin Slayer wanted to kill dragons as a child, and it's not until he sees the dangers of goblins firsthand that he commits himself to his mission.
許せるわけがない。武器を取り、とにかく報復してやろうと行動に移す。探して追い詰め、襲いかかり。
This is an even bigger problem than it seems for two reasons. First, the stigma against goblin slaying causes many to minimize the threat goblins pose.
大物と戦えるかも怪しい雑魚狩り専門。
Slaying goblins isn't complicated. You mostly swing swords around and cut off heads. They can even apparently get killed by a strong kick. Now that doesn't mean it's easy. As we see throughout the show, goblins have tricks of their own that can make them very dangerous. When they're perceived as a simple problem, however, the people sent to deal with the issue are not qualified because, aside from Goblin Slayer, silver-ranked heroes have, quote, better things to do.
またゴブリン退治？これで3件目か。報酬は？なら、経験豊富な冒険者はダメね。
And that's how you end up with situations like this. So, unqualified heroes get murdered and the goblins stick around. That sucks, which leads us to our second issue. The problem worsens as the goblins breed and become even more dangerous. Worse yet, major heroes don't want to get involved because they think goblins are nothing but pests, or they don't want to admit that goblins are a real threat because it would be embarrassing to say so. Enter the Sword Maiden. She is the ass-kicking super leader of Priestess's religion. She even slayed the original Demon Lord with her big awesome sword.
10年前、蘇った魔人王を撃ち滅ぼした。
She hires Goblin Slayer and his friends to deal with some goblins under the city who are presumably responsible for some murders, but it soon becomes obvious that she herself committed some light murder to have the goblins taken care of by someone else.
誰に言えましょう。剣の乙女と呼ばれた英雄が。 どうかゴブリンから私を助けてくださいなどと。
Because she was afraid after her own traumatic run-in, and admitting that you're afraid of goblins after defeating a demon lord is definitely against the unspoken hero code. goblin attacks can leave people in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Those feelings contribute to an already difficult life for many, and that again raises the stakes of positive peace. Dealing with goblins doesn't necessarily change the material conditions of life, but definitely the psychological ones. Goblin Slayer's intervention to kill the goblins and talk to the Sword Maiden about her fears has a substantial effect on her well-being. She no longer has goblin nightmares.
私の方は不思議とあれ以来夢にもこうにどもは現れず穏やかに過ごしております。
What's so interesting about this take on fantasy is what we can expect it will do to the narrative. Normally, as the series goes on, the threats get bigger and scarier. We even see this in standalone episodes when we start off with regular goblins and then the conflict escalates to an ogre. But since the Demon Lord has already gotten Snoked,
魔人王は勇者に倒されたそうだし
and the Goblin Slayer is intent on only slaying goblins, what creative ways will they come up with to up the stakes? Perhaps we'll see more ambiguity regarding the goblin threat. With this false sense of security taking hold across the land, the goblin problem will probably remain in obscurity for most, but as we saw at the end of the last episode, it's about to hit Goblin Slayer much closer to home. So is the story going to stay on goblins, or are we cruising toward a collision with something bigger and badder? Well, you can find out if we're right about the show's trajectory for free on Crunchyroll, or you can upgrade to ad-free HD by going to crunchyroll.com/wisecrack and getting a 30-day free trial. You can watch Goblin Slayer the second it comes out. You'll also be able to enjoy their anime catalog of 30,000 episodes, from their other popular seasonal titles like That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime or Black Clover, to catalog favorites including One Piece, Berserk, and my personal favorite anime, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Once again, that's crunchyroll.com/wisecrack, or click the link in the description below for 30 days ad-free HD anime content. Thanks again for watching. We got some more great videos coming up in the new year, including an episode on Mob Psycho 100, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and maybe another episode that comments on the season finale of Goblin Slayer. As always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.